Hello everyone, my name's Dylan. This is Marvin and Jeslyn. We're here to present to you guys about our project on our Partners for Good's grantee model. This is a capacity building program review we've done over the last whole entire semester. Just a quick update. Our presentation will be filmed and recorded, so any questions we ask are part of the recording, just so you know. With that out of the way, let's talk about our project. Idaho Partners for Good is an Idaho nonprofit focused on supporting and advising other local nonprofits on best practices, community support, and things like that. Just throughout the presentation, we're going to use the acronym IP4G for Idaho Partners for Good, just so you guys are aware. Their grantee program, the focus of our presentation, is emphasizing capacity building, which is defined as expanding program activities other nonprofits take place or implement in their missions. IP4G's grantee program provides up to $45,000 of unrestricted funds over about 3 years, which gives nonprofits flexibility and discretion in how they want to direct those funds. Our projects serve as a capstone activities for us, culminating our experience in the MPA program, as well as aligning with real organizational needs for both IP4G and their partner nonprofits. So why is capacity building so important? Many nonprofits face increasingly difficult service demands. They provide difficult services and necessary services to the community while facing many constraints with budgets, staff, funding uncertainty, or accountability requirements. Of course, this creates difficulty when they have to expand on those services. Literature reviewed show that service delivery is shaped not only by an organization's mission, but also their internal systems, structures, leaderships, and evaluation processes. Capacity building is an effective way to strengthen those conditions and support services, while also making sure that services are provided, aligned with what the community needs, especially when the capacity building is geared towards the specific needs of the organization that they're partnering with, which is a major strength that IP4G has. Their tailored support and assistance allows local nonprofits, again, flexibility, discretion, and freedom in how they would like to implement capacity building efforts. Many funders provide only the financial support alone. IP4G combines technical assistance with financial support. Their structure combines structured assessments, sustained engagement, tailored consultation, and annual reflection, evaluation, and evolution in order to grow and improve their capacity building model. IP4G provided us the opportunity to examine an applied capacity building model operating over time, over those 3 years or sometimes less. It allowed us to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the capacity building efforts across multiple different organizations. The organizations they partnered with are the 3 here posted. First, in 2003, founded in 2003, Life's Kitchen has helped over 1,000 young adults in the Treasure Valley learn crucial skills to succeed in their lives, anything from handling kitchen tools like knives and pots and pans, to balancing a budget and finding an apartment. Life's Kitchen has helped teenagers and youth achieve the skills they need to find economic independence. Founded in 1999, Jesse Tree aims to prevent homelessness and eviction throughout the whole Treasure Valley. This takes the form of emergency rental assistance, case management, and support through court eviction processes. Their programs include financial assistance, landlord mediation, budgeting support, and other educational resources. The organization has seen an over 90% success rate when it comes to landlord mediation, and helping clients remain housed for 5 years or more. Finally, established in 2007, Boise Bicycle Project is a community-focused nonprofit that promotes the personal, social, and environmental benefits of bicycling. Boise Bicycle Project believes that everyone should have access to a bike and aims to create a community around biking and all of its benefits. Their programs include bicycle giveaways to youth and teens, other individuals in the community in need, free in-shop mobile repairs, as well as educational courses, volunteer opportunities for anyone in the community who is interested. All these organizations report annual revenues of less than $200,000 and only have about 10 to 20 full-time paid staff, sometimes even less, depending on the year in the organization. They differ significantly in their missions, internal structures, organizational priorities, and starting conditions. Because of these differences, recurring patterns that arose across all 3 cases were able to give us stronger, more meaningful conclusions that were more beneficial for IP4G's grantee model. Now, the primary purpose of our project is to identify conditions that support effective capacity building, mechanisms that shape those outcomes, and design features that promote sustainability. The primary goal is to conduct a cross-case analysis of IP4G's prior model, not to evaluate past performance, but to help inform the next phase of its implementation. We focus on identifying what supported durable organizational development and examine how outcomes would shape organizational context rather than by interventions alone. Our research question: what key components need to be present for nonprofit capacity building to be effective and sustainable? And what design principles should guide IP4G's future programming? Now, that's all well and good, but what does that actually mean? What did we do? We used a qualitative cross-case analysis to examine multi-year documentation provided to us by IP4G across all the 3 organizations. These documents included evaluation reports, assessments, surveys, internal reflections, meeting notes, logic models, exit interviews, and more to help us get insight into program design, implementation, organizational experience, and outcomes over time. Rather than measuring causal impact, the goal is to create evidence-based insights for future program evolution. It was a formative learning project rather than a summative evaluation. Through our work and through our analysis, we were able to produce 6 key insights.
The first insight was that organizational readiness was super important here. It was arguably the biggest factor that actually influenced progress in these. When we talk about readiness, we're kind of referring to whether or not the organizations already had the internal structure to actually support utilizing this program. So we were kind of looking at things like leadership stability, staffing capacity, board management, documentation systems, and just them having enough time, especially since we were looking at organizations that were rather small. It seemed like the organizational readiness varied a ton, and that really seemed to impact the outcomes. But that's not to say that any of the organizations didn't have progress. Lower levels of readiness did show progress overall, but it appeared that progress and how ready the organization was greatly influenced whether or not it was going to be a sustainable change. This mattered a lot because nonprofits don't all need the same kind of support. And I think that what IP4G is doing right now is really flexible, but they kind of need an easier way to evaluate what kinds of organizations are going to support that flexibility.
Oh, sorry.
We're trying to change at the same time. So the second thing that we really noticed was important was governance and leadership. Across all 3 organizations, these seem to be really important factors. And we saw evidence that stronger decision-making really increased accountability. While this kind of does go hand in hand with that organizational readiness piece, it seemed like organizations that had stronger governance overall appeared to do a lot better, especially when it came to turnaround. Organizations that did not have staff that stayed and maintained seemed to have a little bit of a harder time actually following through with everything that they needed to. We also saw that clearer role definition across leadership and staff was super important. Some of these organizations would have one person who would do tons and tons of things, but because of that, they had a lot on their plate and they weren't necessarily able to, effectively utilize all of the feedback they were receiving. So it did appear to be a major determinant in whether or not it was producing good outcomes. Okay. The next thing that we thought was particularly interesting was the status of the operational systems. So how the goals and programs implemented consistency, things like workflow documentation, if they had clear processes. It seemed as though the more defined systems already existed within the organization, the more likely they were to actually adapt and make progress with this program. We saw a really strong connection between operational systems and evaluation capacity overall. And when the processes were organized, it appeared that it was a lot easier to actually track that progress as opposed to the organizations that had less specific structure. We were able to see a lot more progress and sustainability with it overall. The next major thing that we really noticed was that time and bandwidth were major determinants in whether or not things were able to be implemented effectively. All 3 organizations appeared to have a pretty substantial hiccup with the bandwidth that they actually had, especially since we were looking at those smaller organizations. They just really didn't have a lot of time all the time to effectively utilize what they were being told. And because nonprofits are constantly needing to battle and balance internal improvement work with immediate service delivery, sometimes those things were put on the back burner. So even when leaders were really excited and passionate about the project, and even when IP4G was actually supplying the capacity building mechanisms they needed, if the organization didn't have the time to actually implement those, they had a harder time overall meeting metrics and making as much progress as some that had a little bit more time and bandwidth. And they also found that some of these things took a lot more time than they originally thought. Some of the capacity building ended up lasting a lot longer than original timelines were set as. So it appeared that whether or not this worked had a lot to do with the time and bandwidth, but something that overall we kind of noticed is that all these things tied together. And so that was pretty cool. And then the next thing that we thought was particularly important was capacity building, and like the role that IP4G actually played. It seemed like the organizations that they had better relationships with the leaders and with the people within the organization, things tended to stick a little bit more. The quality of that relationship mattered almost as much as the support itself. Technical expertise and data alone wasn't enough to create those strong outcomes. It really seemed like the relational part of this seemed to be extraordinarily important to producing the outcomes that they wanted. And the organizations also responded a lot better when the support felt collaborative, not imposed on them. So it was important that IP4G was passionate about what the organization was doing. And it was also important that, they understood what the organization's mission, culture, and constraints were. And we saw that sometimes generic recommendations or sometimes even best practices weren't always, it wasn't a one solution fits all kind of thing because of all the variability in the kinds of organizations that they were working with and will continue to. So the final factor that we were looking at was sustainability. This was kind of something that Blossom and Lantz had underlined to us, that they really wanted to figure out how to utilize this program and make it long-lasting. And we saw that sustainability was really determined upon some of these variables we talked about earlier. There was a really big distinction between creating systems and integrating systems. Creating systems looked like making strategic plans, manuals, dashboards, and workflow charts. But integrating systems means that those tools actually have to be utilized and implemented, so they need to become routine. And so this will kind of tie back into the time component. If they didn't have the time to actually utilize these things long term and put it into their workflow, it didn't always work out as well as they had liked it to. And we also found that when these systems were shared across staff members and they were actually implemented into the overall structure of the program, they tended to show better outcomes. And I think that's all you.
Yeah.
Oh, here you go. Sorry, we have to have a fun discussion. There you go.
All right. So after looking at the data that IP4G gave us to work on the three nonprofits, we found out that there were some elements that were different and some were alike. And with that, we came up with recommendations. And first recommendation that we came up with was having a formal readiness assessment. This is whereby nonprofits must be evaluated before capacity building process. So this helps to understand what the organizations really need, like what they need mostly. So prioritizing the needs more than just coming up with recommendations that won't help them. So that was the first one. And this also includes looking at leadership stability, how engaged the board is, and also how strong the current board is with the organization, like if they're working together, if they're if there's any sustainability, and also whether the organizations have time and resources to operate effectively. And also by assessing the readiness early, this will help IP4G better match their support with the nonprofit. And the second recommendation that we came up with was specialized engagement and support. This is whereby different types of level of support are rendered to the nonprofits according to their needs, as I said before, rather than just assuming that one size fits all. And also some may need, some nonprofits may need help in stabilizing internal operations, and some may need governance and strategic planning, and some may need strong evaluation systems or leadership success planning. So this will show you that at different levels, these nonprofits have different needs. So just by specializing engagement and support will also help supporting these nonprofits in different ways. And the third recommendation that we came up with was structured follow-up, just creating a system that will help follow up, and also looking at the accountability through the process. And this recommendation focuses on continuing support after the projects, like say they had events or they had programs that they were implementing. So after those projects or programs end, IP4G has to come in and continue with support, whereby this includes meetings, like follow-up meetings, board check-ins, support with integrating systems, and also practical coaching around evaluation and implementation. And the purpose of this recommendation is that it will help organizations or the nonprofits create plans and tools that they will actually use, not just then, but also in the future. So in conclusion, we would say that effective capacity building is defined by how support is structured and how it is paced, reinforced, and adapted to according to organizational needs, not just by just offering the support. So capacity building has to look at the nonprofit's needs first and then come up with solutions and recommendations. And we would like to thank Blossom. Thank you so much. Lantz, the entire IP4G team, and any other organizations, Rakesh, and MPA program for supporting us through this process and through this project. And lastly, before we get into the questions, this is one of the quotes that we took up from Jimmy Halliburton, who was a partner and a director of the Boise Bicycle Project, whereby he said, assessing the needs of a nonprofit or of the organization is more important, and then that will help you find resources or funds to help in those problems that or needs of the nonprofits before we get into. I'm blank. Thank you.
Thank you all.
So questions?
Yes, Kimberly.
Sounds like you guys started off with a great.
Did you have any other papers?
Like
the ones that we're giving out?
Yeah, that was the fun part. We tried to group each of the, again, reports, assessments, surveys, interviews, et cetera, into different kind of similar categories, assessments with each other, interviews with each other, things like that. From there, we searched through different terms, because some of the documents were longer, some of them were, paragraphs or quotes, some of them were more just like quick questions and answers, and then from there, we kind of found different themes, different ideas, we call them clusters, to find the most common recommendations, most important findings or conclusions that we thought were meaningful to IP4G and the organization. So looking, again, we kind of touched them in Jeslyn's section, but finding the time constraints, bandwidth constraints, evaluation, documents critical evaluation, reflection, capacity, the role of capacity builder, power and trust between the capacity builder and the organization, readiness, leadership, and board engagement, as well as sustainability and long-term impact. We try to group each of the documents according to that, and then obviously synthesize those results into more comprehensive and meaningful findings.
We spent a lot of time thematically coding so many documents.
Yes, that is true.
We kind of just went through and because it was probably 1,000. Like, it was so many documents. And we went through and we just decided what seemed to be higher priority, because some of it was just like internal documentation and some of it was just, it was surveys, and they had all kinds of really informative and important data. They just needed to know what to do with it. So we kind of just started by going through it and seeing what there even was. And then once we did that, we were able to identify specific variables that seemed like they were going throughout several documents, and that's what we were able to pull from. I think our final pool for the paper ended up being something like 65 documents out of all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like Dylan and Jeslyn said, there were different type of documents. So there were exit interviews, different surveys, and just evaluation papers that were just across all three nonprofits. So we had to look into those, prioritize them. But many of those, we used many of them, and there were just a few that we left out. So that's how we came up with the clusters and the themes.
Yes.
First of all, bravo. Good job, guys. And so I'm going to take high level and then I'm going to jump into details. How would you use, if you were on a nonprofit board here or anywhere, how would you use what you did to inform how you govern?
Well, once you get our paper, you'll know a little bit more about it. But something that we kind of worked on developing and looking at a little bit was, how do you actually define readiness? Like, how do you measure that when you don't know much about the organization yet? And so we were able to define some of those variables and look at specific factors that were influencing whether or not an organization appeared to be ready. So something that we had worked on, and that Marvin touched on a little bit, is actually formally documenting that process. Like, we were kind of looking at like a survey of sorts that you would give to people within the organization that would help you measure those levels of readiness, and then utilizing that to, go through your selection process and determine what kinds of needs organizations have, but also what kinds of organizations are going to be more receptive to implementing.
Okay, I'm going to turn it around a little bit. I just invited you to sit on our board. How would you use this to help lead in this space in Idaho?
I think, I'd echo what Jeslyn said, that the organizational readiness assessment was maybe the most effective tool to, like we discussed, nonprofits struggle with time commitments, staff struggles, funding uncertainties, things like that. Formalizing and I guess vocalizing, finding a way to implement an assessment to say, okay, what are we struggling with? What do we need? And what capacity do we have right now? If you're asking an employee, if you had to take 2, 3, 5 hours out of your week to implement a capacity building model, what does that look like? What programs would suffer? What would be improved? What would be, et cetera, et cetera? Starting there, I think, would be the best kind of most valuable beginning, and then seeing how that can grow within the organization and seeing if it's well received, seeing if programs suffer significantly for it or not, or if they're improved from that, would be the next step. If you guys have anything to add on that one?
I think part of it too is like something that we were emphasizing throughout the entire project was that the cool thing about your the model in general is that it's really adaptable. And so like I can't give you an exact answer for like how we would implement it because it would vary, right? It would vary organization to organization, and I think that being able to formally assess that variability before you start actually partnering with those organizations would probably produce even better outcomes than we already saw.
Marvin, how about you?
Well, To me, I was looking at the constraints that we came up with, that we saw across the organizations, whereby there were time cost constraints. What was the other one? There were a lot of limitations, yeah, and then also like layoffs and things like those. So I feel like our recommendations would tackle those constraints that we saw across the organizations, whereby we were going to look at like what's the cause of that, and also like capacity building. Most of the times that doesn't really, like we saw across the data that we were given from IP4G, that most of the times recommendations were not implemented because nonprofits did not have time, because they were also working on certain things, programs and projects of their nonprofits. So I feel like our recommendations of this model will best help nonprofits to look into getting ready for their projects first before just getting into the program and then bringing in recommendations and capacity building. But I think it's best just to evaluate first and give them the actual tools for them to work with, so that they don't face those challenges moving forward.
Awesome. Okay, so let's dive into the recommendations. Recommendation 1 under systems maturity. What did you mean by that?
Do you have that paper in front of you?
Oh, the paper or the slide?
What was that?
She's referring to the handout that we.
Oh, I don't have the. I'm sorry.
So I was actually, when you went over the recommendations, so recommendation 1 right there is systems maturity. So talk to me about what you meant by that.
It typically just had to do with how formalized, it kind of went back to that governance structure piece. We wanted to be able to decide how, because maturity is kind of a weird word for it, because we're not talking about necessarily how old the organization is. We're talking about how advanced the organization is. How stratified is their leadership? How formalized is their documentation? How regularly are they serving whatever community, creating the outcomes that they're looking for? So that was more so like there is going to be a ton of variance in maturity, but we wanted to look, we wanted you guys to be able to assess more effectively how organizations, like where they're starting at, and so the level of maturity would be pretty important to your selection process.
Okay. All right, and then recommendation 3. Talk a little bit more about integration report. Say more about that one.
I mean, the way I understand that is just like as different systems are modified, changed, implemented, or gotten rid of, it's important to evaluate them as they're going on, especially post-grantee model implementation. If there's a new, communications system or a new, it's like employee relations evaluation or discussion with an HR manager, whatever it might be, checking back in with the organization, both the leadership and the boots on the ground employees, to see how it's going and see how well it's being integrated, not just, oh yeah, I fill out this form once a week and then we're done. It's more, hopefully we're looking for like, yes, it's an important part of my daily tasks or weekly tasks or whatever it may be, and it's helping me, perform my job more effectively.
And that would also capture like throughout the process of integrating, because
Of course.
we talked about how creating systems and integrating systems are different. So that support would look like IP4G, utilizing whatever capacity builders we were using with that specific organization and finding ways to make those stick.
Gotcha. No, perfect, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
I like it, awesome. Great job, 3 of you. I've got a question about the process of going through this data. I'm curious, as you were going through these many different types of documents and data, was there any particular format or type that was especially useful for you to understand the story of these efforts? And is there any additional format or type of data you'd like to see to better understand what's going on?
That's a good question. I think I'll answer your second question first. I think one of the difficulties, you can speak to it as well, is that the different types of documents weren't always consistent across these organizations. So sometimes it was hard to say like, oh, this follow-up, this exit interview with Jimmy had a lot of really interesting insights and was very valuable. This quote itself is kind of perfect for, I think, the model and everything else involved. But other organizations didn't have, at least, perhaps they were shorter interviews or they were kind of differently structured, and it made it kind of difficult to compare and contrast between the different grantees. So, and I know it's hard to do because the model will obviously change and be shifting and be iterative as different organizations come into the process, but perhaps maybe just one consistent like survey or
I think kind of what we struggled with the most was that you guys have so much documentation. We had so much lovely information to work with, but it wasn't formalized among the organization. So we were able to see lots and lots and lots of data, but it was hard to compare it against each other. So we really had to focus on like not tangible things. We were defining variables all over the place. But I think that kind of part of what our recommendation is for you to have a more formalized process for selection, but also just assessing readiness throughout, because and capacity overall, because if we're throughout the entire process able to actually track where that's happening, I think we would have had a little bit of an easier time, and I think it's going to help with proving your concept even more, is if we have like a regular measurement that's happening routinely. I would have also have liked to seen more diverse feedback. Sometimes we had a lot of lovely long interviews, but I would have liked to see more like lower level employees within those organizations to kind of see how the capacity building was actually being implemented throughout all the different systems. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'll come up to the first question. It wasn't really easy just to look into these documents one by one, or having BBP on its own or GC3 on its own. So what we did was we had to categorize, say, okay, this document is talking about time constraints, bandwidth, or capacity builders. So we had to categorize those documents. It didn't matter if that document belonged or came from Boise Bicycle Project, or it came from JC3 or Life's Kitchen. So we just had to put them all together, but we just had to categorize them. So if you wanted to look at documents that dealt with capacity building or capacity builders, you just go and filter that, and it will give you all the documents that. Yeah, so that's the process I would use. Yeah, there was lots of coding.
That being said, I think some of the open-end interviews were helpful because, especially as we saw similar data arise from different organizations and different types of interviews, we're able to recognize time constraints is a major theme that comes up a lot, even in different types of documents or interviews or et cetera.
The interviews were great, and they were
Yes.
very helpful.
Yes.
So I would like to see more of them across,
Yes.
Yeah.
throughout the entire time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.